Hello folks, and welcome to my studio. Here's another reference shot of the tree which I'll be painting today in watercolour, and I've set up a time lapse so that you can see the painting evolving. I've already taken the time to do a fairly tight drawing, mapping out all the salient points, and I'm working on putting in the shadows fairly early on. I quite like the way the shadows almost describe a tree shape of their own upon the surface of the tree itself, and I look for that quite often when I go out and paint a reference shot, because I quite like the abstract shapes that the shadows create upon the bark and upon the trunk of the tree, and how they help to describe the form with the raking light. So I'm putting in quite pale tones with watercolour, and just taking my time to observe the different subtleties and nuances of tone and texture across the tree itself. I'm also looking for warm and cool colours. That's quite a good thing to look for when you're working on something that has a subtlety in it. If you look for warm and cool colours, it can help you determine the difference between certain greens or certain blues, so it's a good thing to look for. Again, I'm using a synthetic brush like I did in the last video, pretty much the whole brush for the whole video, although I do use one or two others you may not be able to notice in the time lapse. I'm just now working on a background tree, and I've decided to mute the background, keeping it to blues and greys so that it recedes away and doesn't dominate and doesn't come forward too much. This tree is another one up at Cadbury Hill Fort near Crediton, which is where I live. It's a beautiful area. You can see for miles up there. It's an absolutely fantastic place, and these trees, especially in their naked state, are lovely and sculptural, and they're quite beautiful, and I could never tire of looking at them. Painting can get tiring at times, but I still love having a go at rendering them. And anyway, here's a view of my setup, the usual sloping board. I've got my cloth there to keep my brush wiped so I can manage the amount of water. There's a bit of blotting paper just so I can wipe out certain parts. It helps to mop up some of the paper and not make it too long a process waiting for things to dry. So back on with the time lapse. You can see a small spray bottle off to the left there, and I use that quite often to keep areas of the painting damp, although not on this particular painting. The reason I've got it here in this time lapse is because I quite often use it to keep my watercolours moist. I'm using Winsor & Newton watercolours, and I use pans, half pans and full pans, but I tend to buy the paint in tubes and replenish the pans when they run low. That way I can keep the paint moist and active and how I like it without having to squirt out very often. It's quite a useful way of working. I've got several watercolour tins and several different types of paint, but mainly Winsor & Newton artist quality. I've always had them and I always quite like them, but I'm not averse to trying some different ones sometime. Now you can see I'm using watercolour pencils, actually, caran. I don't use them very often, but in this instance, because so much of the background is grey, lots of filigree grey branches, I can control the tone quite well by pressing on harder or lighter, and although you can see me painting in brush there, quite a lot of the background branches are actually drawn in with caran, plus some of the highlights and different marks on the trunk of the tree are done in caran too. So you can see I'm just putting in a few there with a lighter blue, which works well with the grey. Just breaks it up, gives it a little bit of variety. So they're really useful for this type of work, and because they're water soluble, you can go back in with a wet brush and adjust your tones when you've worked with them. So here's the final result. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I'll be doing more shortly. See you on the next one.